where you wanted to learn a little bit more about what our antivirus and malware acquisition plans and things of that nature. We've been obviously doing a lot of different things that the board has indicated that I would like a little bit more insight into. Given that, I asked Jason Garms, who is an architect and program manager of the team that's looking into these issues and making technology and other types of bets in this area, and I've asked him to come over and talk. So he's basically on until 1:30, I believe, and we'll take a break after that and come from there. So with that, Jason, take it away.
Wow, thank you, Dave.
You bet.
Good afternoon. Let's see.
By the way, we're mercifully free of slideware in this one too. So this is going to be discussion format.
Yeah, I hope nobody minds that too much. I'm not a big slide person myself. I find them somewhat distracting to conversation. So thanks for the introduction, Dave. My name is Jason Garms. I work in the anti-malicious software team here at Microsoft. So I'm responsible for if it's software and it's bad and we're going to go after it, that's kind of my team. We are part of the Security Business and Technology Unit here at Microsoft. And what I don't own, I would say normally that I'm the anti-guy. But what we don't own is anti-spam and anti-phishing, which are actually less about software and more about users and other things. And we partner with our friends in MSN, what's called MSN Safety, on those technologies. So we try to ultimately come up with an integrated set of strategies, although my team doesn't personally deliver those technologies. What Dave asked me to do is just kind of go through a little bit of our historical perspective here at Microsoft in terms of our thinking around malicious software. You know, kind of, I was going to rewind the clock a little bit, probably 7 or 8 years, and kind of start from there, because that kind of brings us up to where we are in the present. You know, if people don't actually want to hear the thinking that went behind it, some people don't. My previous discussions with people on the academic advisory board is that, in fact, the things that led us up to where we are today is almost as relevant as exactly where we are today and where we're going. So we used to take a fairly interesting stance at Microsoft, which is the ecosystem, the antivirus ecosystem stance that says there's this healthy ecosystem out there of third-party companies, the McAfees, the Symantics, and others of the world that provide, you know, great technology for our customers to help protect them against malicious software. And we view this as a pretty grand old ecosystem. And this dates back pretty far. And we looked at simple numbers like the total number of OEMs, new machines that are sold from OEMs that have antivirus software. And we said the ecosystem is healthy. 90 to 95% of all OEM systems sold 7 or 8 years ago contained some form of antivirus software that typically was something in the neighborhood of a 90-day to 180-day trial version. And typically, you know, we would talk with our partners in this space, the Symantics and the McAfees, and they would give us statistics like, you know, 50 or 70 or even 90% renewal rates from those users. And so, and then you looked at analysts and what they claimed the penetration of antivirus into the ecosystem was, and the numbers were always fairly high. And so we tended to say, oh, well, the ecosystem, the Windows ecosystem is actually pretty good. The antivirus commercial ecosystem is pretty good. And, you know, after all, we're a platform vendor, so building a product, building, you know, an ecosystem that helps to engender a large money-making business is actually a fairly good idea. Except there's a real sickness to that ecosystem. In reality, it's not a healthy ecosystem. It is a sick ecosystem, because basically saying that the necessity of having this extraordinarily large money-making venture out there is a demonstration of something potentially wrong with Windows itself. And you know, it takes a long time to kind of, you know, come to grips with that. The reality is, it's not that Windows stinks, or Windows is a terrible operating system, or Windows is super inherently insecure. That's a debate we can have a little bit later. The reality is, no matter what platform you're on, there is the ability to write malicious software for that platform. I've certainly been involved with that on other platforms. In fact, some of the best antivirus software originally sprouted up in the Macintosh arena, of which I used to be heavily involved in. And there continues to be malware, in fact, on the Macintosh, on the Unix and other flavor platforms. The problem is, on the Windows platform, of course, you have the standard things. Oh, Windows is ubiquitous. It makes it a very interesting target, so on and so forth. Whether we want to argue that another platform is more or less inherently resilient to malware or not, the fact of the matter is we have a platform that has an extraordinary amount of dominance, which sets up for large pandemic-style attacks on the ecosystem, and we've seen those over the last few years. My first job when I moved out here to Redmond was to start an organization that ultimately Mr. Lipner here helped to take off my hands and take to the next generation, called the Microsoft Security Response Center. And the whole goal of building that organization in '96 was to build effective trust in the Microsoft name and create a sense of commonality at Microsoft about how we treat security, especially vulnerabilities in our software. And to do that in a holistic way for all of our products. During that period from '96 forward, we began to see the first set of pandemics on the Microsoft platform. It started with less malware and more forms of large-scale DDoS and other attacks. We had Teardrop, Land, and a couple of TCP stack-based vulnerabilities that came into play during the '96-'97 timeframe, which were really some of the first truly significant attacks on our platform that showed the opportunity for pandemics. During the Teardrop attacks, which was one of the fragmentation attacks on the TCP stack, we saw a large number. One of our U.S. government customers at that time, the largest customer of Windows in the world, report to us that 50,000 of their machines blue-screened one morning that were directly connected to the internet. That was a fairly large number, considering the total number of NT4 machines in the world at that period of time directly connected to the internet was not as large as it is today. So the opportunities were certainly there. And about that time, we started to look across Microsoft and say, well, let me get rid of my cell phone here. I have to find it first.
Step on it.
Yeah, induction. It was about this time that we started saying, well, gosh, what's our role as Microsoft? What should we actually do about this? And the clear-cut answer was identify and fix vulnerabilities in our product. And that was where a lot of things started. The Secure Windows Initiative, obviously, the more investment in the MSRC, and others. But it also began a set of conversations about should we acquire antivirus technology or build antivirus technology to ultimately help protect our customers. And at the time, Microsoft had historically had a foray into the antivirus space. With DOS 6, we shipped antivirus technology we licensed from Central Point Software, who was later acquired by one of the larger AV vendors. And we did a fairly abysmal job of that, in fact. And we were summarily beaten up by the antivirus industry. Effectively, the decision to ship antivirus software in DOS 6 was really a marketing play. It was decided by a marketing guy whose name will remain anonymous. And it was about trying to figure out what the value proposition to DOS 6 really was going to be, because DOS 6, after all, was a couple of improvements over DOS 5, adding defrag, disk compression, and a couple of other things. And we said, well, gosh, wouldn't it be icing on the cake if we included antivirus software in DOS 6? And so they went off and did this licensing deal, and had no technical understanding about what it really meant to build antivirus. So the concept of doing signature updates or anything else was kind of left out of the picture. And even at that period of time when we did DOS 6, and that was the early 90s, it was fairly well known that signature updates were kind of a necessity in the antivirus space. So we ended up shipping this thing DOS 6 with antivirus support that ultimately, when our customers would run, they would say, oh gosh, it says I'm virus free. And of course, the software wasn't updated, for a year or 2 years. In fact, it was never updated as long as we continued to ship DOS 6. And the original intent of the deal was that Central Point would ultimately come in and they would do an upsell to those customers. But once we shipped DOS 6, a lot of that stuff kind of fell to the weeds. And so our customers for a year, 2, 3 years after DOS 6 shipped would run this antivirus scanner and it would say you're safe and secure. So that was really, for people that were paying attention, our first opportunity to say, gosh, there is a potential real problem here of letting, setting false expectations, letting people think that they're in fact secure when in fact they really need to do something much more. So once we finished with DOS 6, we kind of ditched the AV effort. We kind of learned our lesson that, in fact, being an antivirus vendor meant something more than just ship it and forget it. And so we kind of left that alone. So fast forward us back to 96, we started a set of conversations again. Should we actually become an antivirus vendor and so forth? And we then proceeded to repeat that set of conversations about once a year for the subsequent years till about 2002. And the tenure of those conversations typically went, hey, look, healthy ecosystem. Look, the numbers say that there's a lot of support. But then we started to have the true, actual viral and worm pandemics. I Love You, Melissa. Ultimately, then Code Red, Nimda, Sasser, Slammer, Blaster. The list just kind of goes on of things that had a pretty significant impact. And as each of those would occur, the group of people would meet again and we'd say, should we become an antivirus vendor? Should we invest in this area? No, the ecosystem's healthy. And finally, in 2002, one of the things that was fairly important is we had started this security business unit here at Microsoft. And the security business unit had a bunch of different goals. And I'm sure you've heard about it in the past and how the goals differed from the execution. But when Steve Ballmer originally went to Mike Nash and said, "Hey, I want to build a security business unit. There's this multi-billion-dollar, opportunity to actually monetize security in some significant ways. Mike, go off and build the organization that monetizes security." Mike said, "Okay," and that was November. And Mike went around recruiting people and recruited me to help come and start driving SBU, and I had a very ulterior set of motives. My ulterior set of motive was to help protect the ecosystem, and in the back of my head I said, the money is nice, but my goal is going to be to help direct this organization to the point where it's really investing in, more engineering for security, engineering excellence, and products that help the ecosystem in those ways. And through the first year of SBU's life, the vast majority of the labor invested in that organization was really about engineering for security, stuff that Steve started driving with Secure Windows Initiative and so forth. And on the investing in technology point, we did a number of technology incubation projects. What we call the desktop distributed firewall at the time, distributed intrusion detection systems, malware prevention, behavioral blocking technologies, and a couple of others. And in the fall of 2002, we came back to this real question about, are we really serious about becoming an antivirus vendor and going after malware in a very serious way? And some of the decision points that we face in this problem is that, we're 2002, where 10 years after antivirus became a full core mainstream business, 13 to 14 years after antivirus technology actually began to become formulated. And was this in fact a good time? And what are our motivations for actually doing this? And it turns out that the set of conversations we had to go through in our mind is, if Microsoft is in fact to get into the antivirus space, do we, and by the way, everything that we're talking about is, I share with you because you are our TWC Academic Advisory Board, but the thought process is not necessarily public data. It is covered under our NDAs. So just wanted to remind people of that. But the problems that we're facing is, good large ecosystem, multi-billion-dollar companies that are working on this technology. Microsoft. I've worked for Microsoft for 9.5 years, and I love the company. I'm super proud of it. We try to do the right things as much as possible, and I have a lot of confidence in this company. But one of the things that drives this company is going to be money at the end of the day. And the thing that I feared most going into this is if we get involved in the antivirus space for a purely pain point of view and don't see it as a revenue opportunity, that down the road we may actually lose our appetite, right, for the investments. And antivirus, as we know from our lessons, is not one of those spaces you can simply invest in for a while and then stop that investment. And so the greatest fear in the back of my head as we're having these conversations is if we don't monetize this in some way that becomes interesting or at least sustainable for the company, we run the risk of having an impact on the existing ecosystem of antivirus vendors, of which some amount of diversity is a nice thing. And at the end of the day, maybe instead of there being 75 antivirus vendors in the world, which there are today, maybe the worst thing in the world for me would have been one antivirus vendor, and that's Microsoft. And the reason that that's the worst thing in the world is simply because if we ever decide to stop investing in that area, it leaves a real problem for the rest of the Windows ecosystem. And we can do all these kinds of projections into the future and say our hope and our desire is that by the time we decide to stop investing in antivirus, we've made the system completely robust, completely resilient, and that malware can't exist in a non-signature-based antivirus environment. Now, the problem is, I like to be an optimist, but I'm also a realist, and I don't actually believe that we'll ever see a day where what we call an ABI user, ABI is the name of the persona that we attribute to the AOL mom, kind of my mom effectively, who really is not computer savvy. I'm not convinced that we'll ever get to a world where my mom is going to be able to make all of the decisions that she's going to need to make all by herself about what's good and what's bad and everything else. And signature-based antivirus and signature-based malware detection technology certainly helps my mom make the kinds of decisions, or not have to make the kinds of decisions that ultimately are going to lead to her protection. So the good news is in 2002 we decided that we really wanted to become an antivirus vendor. We were going to invest in this space significantly. We were going to build out our capabilities across a number of different customer segments, from the consumer to the enterprise, from the desktop to the edge, and so forth. And we began our investigations. Well, we had already begun our investigations, but we got approval to complete our investigations and move forward in that vein. So in February of 2003, we acquired a company called GCAD. We acquired the technology and the right to hire people from a company called GCAD SRL of Romania, who was a fairly good antivirus vendor. In our decisions about who to acquire and everything else, number one on our list was actually technology, and number two was value. And we ultimately, I must have personally traveled around the world 3 or 4 times in the process of doing the acquisition conversations, and GCAD had a really great mixture of core antivirus engine technology, really smart, sharp people, and a great research method for examining and analyzing new viruses. And so we actually completed that the acquisition conversations in February and ultimately announced it in June. And our intent there, most of the technology we ended up acquiring for GCAD, the primary value of that technology was in the core engine itself. So being able to decode various forms of packed, encrypted, runtime compressed files, being able to create signatures that can look for heuristic mechanisms across those files, either forms of CRC checks across certain parts of the data segments, and so forth, as well as the signature base and library base of a large amount of historical viruses. Because again, going into the space, one of our decision criteria was we weren't going to be able to come, hi, we're the new guys to the game, and by the way, we're only going to detect viruses that come out from now into the future, right? It's like there's this whole wealth of existing things that are called ITW, or in the wild viruses, that you need to also be able to handle. And so GCAD ultimately gave us those capabilities. To quickly walk through a couple of our other acquisitions and then come back and complete the story. You may have heard of a company called Pelican Software of Israel. Somebody may have talked about that acquisition previously. Pelican's a company that I acquired basically at the same time we acquired GCAD. And they're what's called a behavioral blocking technology. So they had some very interesting technology about being able to effectively sandbox applications that are running on a system based on what those applications in fact do. And we bought that technology and the people mostly as a long-term investment. We had no intent to actually turn around and productize that technology immediately, because in fact there are tremendous limitations in this style of technology having to do with application compatibility, performance, reliability, and fundamental circumventability of a lot of the technology. So it's trivially easy for me to write a piece of malware or software that circumvents any of the behavioral blocking technology that's actually on the market today. And so we had this bar that said, hey, if it takes a smart person an hour to write something that circumvents this, why are we going to ship it to 100 million users? Because somebody can just write something, circumvent it, and then publish it as a library. And every worm and malware author from that period of time on can, in fact, circumvent it. But so that investment was done for the technology, a huge amount of documentation pool they had built up, best practices, but also for a small group of 5 or 6 people we brought over from Israel from the acquisition. The third acquisition that's relevant to this space is a company I bought in December. We closed called Giant Company Software. And Giant Company is actually an anti-spyware product that, interestingly enough, had only been on the market for about, when we completed the acquisition, it had been on the market for 8 weeks. At that time, most of the anti-spyware products out there, you had two separate types of anti-spyware products on the market in October. One was the anti-spyware products from the antivirus vendors, and the other was the anti-spyware products from these kind of new upstarts, the WebRoots, Alorias, Spybot, Lavasoft, et cetera, of the world, these effective new upstarts. And they took very different approaches to actually how to detect and remove spyware. And one of the fundamental problems with the antivirus vendors' approach is a lot of spyware removal is about what we call notice and consent or notice and choice, which is bringing stuff to a user's attention that's on their machine, but we don't have the authority to actually remove that automatically without their decision, because they may actually want it. Kazaa is a great example, Kazaa and Claria. If I remove Claria from your machine and Kazaa stops working, is that a good thing for the user? So most of the antivirus technology didn't have the ability to involve the user in this kind of a conversation. The other problem with the antivirus technology is that it tended to be built on their existing antivirus products, obviously. But the problem with that is there are no antivirus products on the market today that play well with each other. So you can only have one product installed at a time. And so if we look, for example, at McAfee and semantics, if you were just a clueless user and you walk into CompUSA and you're like, oh, I'm running semantic antivirus at home, but when I read the back of the McAfee anti-spyware product, it sounds like a better anti-spyware product, so let me go and install that. Woe to that user, because what ended up happening is your machine wouldn't boot after installing the anti-spyware product from McAfee with the antivirus product from Symantec. because they were effectively two antivirus products, which we know doesn't work very well. So that was one category. The other category, these kind of upstarts, they actually, quite frankly, were more circumventable. So a clever anti-spyware vendor, or excuse me, a clever spyware vendor could circumvent many of the anti-spyware technologies. But they tended to be a little bit easier to use. They tended to work well on a single machine. In fact, we have a number of reports of people running up to 9 anti-spyware products on a single machine. My only question to those people is, what else does that machine do? Because most of them tend to consume, anywhere from 3 to 10% of all your CPU time all the time when they're doing nothing. And so you put 9 of them on your machine, and it kind of really makes you wonder. So we were building some anti-spyware technology in-house, again, based on our antivirus assets, but we continue to have an open mind to the rest of the anti-spyware community from an acquisition point of view. And we had looked at everybody that's out there and had serious concerns about most of the technology, everything from the engineering. Most of these companies are companies that accidentally got where they are. They were in the right place at the right time, and you go and you're like, hey, so tell me how you find new signatures. And they're like, well, if somebody sends me an email and says, here's this new piece of spyware, I add it. And you're like, huh, so do you use any other criteria? Nope. It's like, how do you add cookies? Well, somebody sends me a link to a website, I'll add that cookie to my spyware detection routine. Okay, that sounds really good. So I can, send you Microsoft.com. Oh, I'll recognize that. I would never add that to my product. But the point is, it's very easy to get any random things added to these products. How do you test your product? Oh, well, I ship it to my users. And how do you localize your product? Well, I kind of post the resource files to the web, and I hope that somebody, will localize them. And in fact, a couple of vendors do this. And I was like, so have you ever read your Japanese version? Do you know what the UI really says? And they're like, nope. But nobody's complained about it yet. It's like, okay. So when we looked at those, it's like, well, we'd rather start from scratch. Now, the interesting thing that happened is at the end of October, we ran across this product called Giant Anti-Spyware from Giant Company based out of New York. And this was the first product that actually fit in what our vision of anti-spyware was about. And the roadmap that we had laid out for anti-spyware was about, as I said earlier, notice and choice, bringing things to the user's attention about what's running on your machine, giving them information about those items, and helping them remove them if they choose to remove them, and really focusing on the usability of the product. Because if you've used some of the anti-spyware products out there, their usability does not typically fit into the equation. So we ran across them on the 27th of October. We signed an LOI a few days later, letter of intent to acquire them, and we completed the acquisition, fastest acquisition in Microsoft history. They're now an integral part of our long forward anti-spyware technology. We actually turned their technology around with two complete security reviews, about 300 bug fixes, redoing a bunch of their wiring up to their telemetry collection site to do SSL-based data collection instead of plain text data collection, and a lot of other things in about 18 days, and shipped the beta on the 6th of January. A few days after that, we announced our intent to acquire a company called Sabari. And so it was just, Microsoft, gosh, you just kind of one announcement after the other. How do these all kind of fit together? So Sabari is actually not an antivirus company by the traditional definition of antivirus companies. In fact, the good old boys network of antivirus analysts out there has traditionally excluded Sabari from any of their conversations, because they actually don't build an antivirus engine, and they don't have antivirus researchers on staff. What they do instead is they create business relationships, OEM relationships, with a number of smaller antivirus vendors to take the engines from these antivirus vendors and ship them in the Sabari product. So that sounds kind of interesting at first glance, but why is that exciting, new, or novel? And Sabari's products, they don't build desktop antivirus, they build enterprise antivirus. and they only build it for collaboration servers. So what's a collaboration server? They build it for Microsoft Exchange servers. They build a version for SharePoint collaboration SharePoint servers. They build it for instant messaging and real-time communication, and they build it for like Lotus Notes. What's that? And so they have about 10,000 enterprise customers today, and a very large number of the Fortune 500 uses Sabarri software. So again, why is it interesting to use Sabarri software? Well, it's not a matter of you simply, when you run Sabarri software, you get to choose whose antivirus engine you get to use. But what you actually get is you get to choose combinations of the antivirus engines that Sabarri applies to the system. And again, why would you want to run more than one antivirus software? This kind of goes back to what I said earlier. On a desktop, you can't run more than one desktop antivirus software. Especially on an email or messaging, something that's an asynchronous delivery mechanism. Being able to run multiple antivirus software gets you the maximum protection of the union of all the engines that you're doing scanning with. And the reality, when you look back over the years at the antivirus vendors, is the quality of the signatures, the timeliness of their signatures, and the accuracy of their signatures varies greatly from day to day, week to week, depending on which analysts are on duty, what time of the day a particular threat becomes widespread, and so forth. So some semantic one day may be the first to catch mydoom.o variant. But the first out of all the 65, 70 antivirus vendors in the world to catch and produce signatures for that. But on another week, they may take 2 or 3 days to get their signatures out for that. And so from an enterprise point of view, if you want the maximum amount of protection, you can in fact say, by running multiple antivirus engines, you're getting the maximum protection of the union of all of them. Additionally, from a heuristic point of view, which is non-signature based detection, some of the vendors are better than others. For example, Kaspersky Labs has a fairly good set of heuristics detection, much better than Symantec or McAfee's. And that means that when a new variant of MyDoom comes out, their software has a higher chance of catching it without needing new signatures than Symantec's or McAfee's. So having like Kaspersky in the mix is a good and interesting thing. So in enterprises get to now choose profiles that are effectively DEF-CON levels or threat levels that make up a mixture of these antivirus products. So Microsoft, for Microsoft.com, for all of our IT email, we switched over to Sabarri's technology last June. And we run, on our normal day-to-day profiles, we scan all of our messages that come in using 2 engines. I won't tell you whose engines they are, but they're the 2 engines that the folks in our IT department decided were their favorites. And every message that comes in has to get a return of yes is clean from both engines before the message is permitted to pass through. Now, we've also defined a couple of other threat level profiles depending on what's going on in the world, in the internet at the time, and so forth. And so we have our maximum threat level, which is effective dire worm watch, which when they throw the switch, they just click one button, and all of a sudden we're running in maximum certainty mode, where we're using all 6 engines that ship in the Sabarri extended product to scan every single email that comes through our system. Again, maximum certainty. So this is a very interesting approach for organizations that want flexibility and want to be able to make trade-offs of speed versus certainty and so forth. It's also a very interesting platform opportunity because antivirus to this day still continues to be the biggest dog software that you run on your system in terms of it's consuming performance performance of your system all the time. People turn it off because it is consuming, overhead all the time. Gamers tend to not run with antivirus software installed because it makes, Quake jittery, and all they want is Quake to have perfect frame refresh. So that's kind of Sabarri's strength. Our intent there is once we complete acquisition, because we're still in regulatory review on that acquisition. Once we complete acquisitions, we will be taking the GCAT engine that we have and we've been tuning and honing and improving over the last few years and inserting that into Sabarri and having a 7th engine effectively available to our customers. and will continue to use the Safari product as a platform product. We control the interfaces into Exchange, into SBS, and our other collaboration products that have the highest impact on performance and reliability of those systems, instead of having to have the AV vendors control those interfaces, which is what causes the crashes today, which is what causes a huge amount of the performance hits today. And we'll be looking to extend this kind of platform technology through other parts of our product line as well. So one could imagine, Safari for ISA. One could imagine Safari for other types of systems as well. So, again, how does this, all kind of fit back with each other? As I said earlier, there's this established ecosystem of antivirus vendors out there, and we're, taking a fairly careful approach to how we move into this space. We believe that antivirus and anti-spyware technology ultimately is a merged technology. There are some significant differences in those pieces of technology, in that most viruses and worms are release and forget it. The author, it's very hard to find the author without a snitch, and we've successfully done that a few times. So it's very hard to find the author without a snitch, versus most spyware is business model driven. There's money behind it. And we know from a legal law enforcement investigatory method how to follow money. We, Microsoft, know, but the law enforcement folks know as well. And so for the spyware game, you have two forms of money trails. You have the money trails that lead to people that are opportunistic. They pop up for a week and they try to get as much money as they can and they disappear. And then you have the business model driven corporate entities. One can imagine those as such as the Clarias of the world. And Claria is not going to intentionally go and do something illegal, or they may try to go along the line, but they're not intentionally going to try to do something legal. So we have some opportunities in the spyware case that we don't have in the AV case, to actually use things like laws to ultimately influence the behaviors and draw these lines between malware and pure raw malware and spyware. And so one of the things we've seen in the last few months is an increase of what are called rootkits. Typically kernel mode or also user mode, things that modify the behavior of the operating system to hide spyware from anti-spyware software. So the way that we approach this is, IRA's folks and some of the folks in DC that are doing lobbying, we're trying to make it in the Spy Act bill and some other things, to make it effectively illegal for a company to intentionally hide from security software. And so that puts companies like Claria in an interesting stance. They would not have the option to go and say, I want to be a good guy, but yet I'm going to hide from security software. And so it drives this wedge between the good guys, the people that want to be good and want to be a sustainable corporate entity and ultimately want to list on the NASDAQ or whatever, and the people that are just interested in working as effectively organized crime and making a few bucks here and there. And so we certainly have those opportunities. But ultimately, the technologies that we need to detect and remove this software will merge. So on a product roadmap point of view, one of the other things that happened last year is everybody remembers Blaster, I'm sure. Did anybody actually get Blaster? Nobody wants to admit it, ever. Well, statistically, probably at least half of this room actually got Blaster, even if they don't want to admit it. But they're
a careful crowd.
Yeah, I think we're statistically
a pretty
unrepresentative.
Yeah, probably. My wife doesn't run antivirus software, by the way. I have to admit it. So Blaster hit. Blaster was one of the largest pandemics, obviously. But one of the things that happened when Blaster hit is characteristic of the SICK ecosystem of antivirus, which is Blaster hit on August 11th, 2003. It was pretty enormous. We had the largest call spike in our Microsoft help data center, we call PSS, Product Support Services, that we've ever had. We had 1.9 million people call in a single day, 99% of which got busy signals. And average hold time was 8 to 12 hours if you didn't get a busy signal. So from that point of view, it was fairly significant. From the actual total number of Windows machines in the ecosystem that were potentially infectable by Blaster, we knew that number was approximately 170 million legal copies. Who knew how many illegal copies of Windows could also be subject to it? And we, so we knew this was bad. Well, the AV industry, of course, they issue all their press releases, they drive their stock price up, which they do every time one of these viruses hit. And by about 2 weeks after that, they were on to the next thing. Oh, Blaster's done with, it's now so big, and so on and so forth. And it didn't matter if Blaster was actually a solved problem. All that mattered is that their stock price went up, more people bought their software, and so the investment there is not really about the ecosystem. So I was in the process of building a coalition of ISPs, and we now have about 40 of the largest ISPs in the world, representing about 400 million end users across pretty much all the geographies that we built up specifically after Blaster. But one of our opportunities was to work with them to do data collection on their actual core backbones, looking for, not specifically data collection, but analysis of data that was going across the wires. And we, SBC Communications, the fourth largest broadband ISP in the U.S., calls me up one day in November of 2003 and says, you know what, we're seeing 7 to 8% of all of our backbone traffic on our core infrastructure backbones as Blaster and Nachi replication traffic. And I said, nah, you can't be seeing. These are big pipes. These are, some of the biggest pipes in the world. 6 to 7 to 8% of that can't be replication traffic from one worm. And they said, well, if that worries you, then the next data point will worry you even more, which is when you look at a packet per second rate, it's 20 to 30% of all of the packets per second we're traversing are Blaster and Nachi replication traffic. And I kind of said, wow, that's unbelievable. So I got on a plane and I flew down to Dallas and spent 2 days with their network engineers going over the methodology. And sure enough, those numbers were completely accurate. They were statistical based on 40% of their POPs across the region they do, but there was a good statistical sampling. And we took that data and we went to the other ISPs and we said, what are you folks seeing? And they said, well, we're not seeing anything. Our networks are fine. And we said, well, are you looking at it in this way? And we showed them the methodology for data collection. And they said, a couple of them, most of them said, no, we're not seeing anything, we don't want to worry about it. But a couple of them said, no, we're interested in actually looking more closely. And so the largest New Zealand ISP, another major East Coast ISP, BT, British Telecom, and a couple of others went and started looking at their backbones using this methodology. And actually came back with similar numbers and said, wow, we're seeing very, very similar kinds of data coming across our networks as what you saw. That's really concerning, because what this means is that of the global backbone of the internet, an enormous fraction of that traffic is caused by one family of malware. Imagine if, in fact, a couple of more of these came across. We're looking at some fairly catastrophic impact to the global critical infrastructure. And again, this is 3 months, now 3.5, this is December 1st of 2003. It's 3.5 months after Blaster first came out, and like 2 months after the AV industry called Blaster dead, or no longer relevant. In fact, the estimates that were being thrown around is that no more than 500,000 machines worldwide at the peak were infected with Blaster or Nachi. And so in talking with the ISPs, we said, well, so how do we approach this? And SBC said, well, we've done everything we can. We've sent repair trucks to people's homes, so they're watching the traffic come across, using their PPPoE technology and binding the IPs back to their user accounts. They were able to identify which users were infected, and so they would literally send trucks to drive up to your house, knock on your door. Hi, I'm here. Your machine is infected with a worm. I'd like to help you. and of course, that was the bottom tier, in reverse order. They would call the users, they would send them emails. They even started implementing network quarantining methods. So if you were, in fact, designated in their scanning modes as being infected, they would block your account when you attempted to log on. I mean, they tried literally everything that a bunch of really smart people down in Dallas could figure out, and us working with them. And they still were not able to get these numbers down significantly. And so after spending a bunch of time with them, I said, well, why don't we, I'll build a cleaner for this. We've never done this before. I'm not sure that I really want to do this, but I don't know how else to do this. I'll build a cleaner for this, and I'll ship it through the Windows Update mechanism, which will at least get, at the time we had about 170 million regular users of Windows Update. It will at least do a lot to clean the ecosystem. How's that sound? Everybody said, great. So we built a cleaner and shipped through Windows Update on the 13th of January of 2004. And in fact, what we had thought about, we had done the extrapolation, 6 to 7% of all the network, this number of, these ISPs have this much market share and so forth, and we extrapolated a number out, and we said we think that the worldwide infection is somewhere between 8 and 10 million users worldwide were probably infected with Blaster based on those numbers. And so we shipped a cleaner, and we wrote it. By that time, the GCAD folks, our GCAD acquisition, the employees had come on board. They actually wrote the utility for this. We didn't use any of the GCAD technology, so we were still going through a fairly heavy-duty TWC SDL-style code review of this. And so we generated a very minimalistic set of codes, about 700 lines of C code, reviewed it as heavily as we could, because we're going to ship this to 170 million users, potentially. And so we shipped it. In the first few weeks, we cleaned about 8 million machines in a month. And we're like, wow, that's pretty significant. And we watched the number grow, and we watched it grow, and we watched it grow. And to end that thread of the story, by December 31st of 2004, almost 352 days after we shipped it, we had cleaned Blaster off of over 40 million machines worldwide. And part of that is not there were 40 million unique machines, but what we were finding, again, from the ecosystem point of view, is we were learning a bunch of things. Users would wipe and reload their machines from the original OEM CDs. They would use System Restore to roll back to a previous state, which was unpatched and so forth. And but we cleaned it off of 60 million machines, and we believe, off of over 40 million machines, and we believe that probably at least 75% of those were unique machines, though we don't have data collection mechanisms to actually prove that. We also, last year, built 3 additional, we were so enamored by the success of being able to help the ecosystem clean our customers, have users have a better experience with Windows, that we built 3 more cleaners, only 2 of which we shipped through Windows Update to users. And between those 2, we cleaned another 20 million worms and viruses off users' machines. So in those 4 virus and worm families, we cleaned over 60 million worms and viruses off of people's machines last year. So in September...
did you cut down the bandwidth from the...
Yeah, actually.
Did SBC...
Great question. Noise. It's not statistically relevant anymore.
Right.
But just cleaning the machines shouldn't have done that, right? Because there's still sources of infection out there, and it would have repopulated itself unless there was something else going on to stop that.
Well, so great point. So what actually happened with the original cleaners? So since they're offered through Windows Update, we have what's called Windows Update pre-detection logic, which when you go and you visit Windows Update, it says, "Hi, I'm running this software, I have these updates," and so forth. And we would predicate the delivery of the cleaner tool to your machine based on the presence of MS-03-26, which is the security patch that fixes the RPCSS vulnerability.
Okay. So you fix the vulnerability at the same time.
Right. And our presumption was effectively that the user, since the user is coming to Windows Update anyway, that they're going to get the RPC patch. And because of the direction that effectively competing for reboots, we would predicate the completed install and reboot before we deliver the cleaner tool to you. So what that actually meant is for certain users, you may not get cleaned until your second visit to Windows Update. You may not get cleaned on your first reboot. But the good news is all of that experience in there all went into what we call Woo v5, which is the v5 version of Windows Update. And we fixed all that sequencing problems and everything else. The other thing that we had that we learned from this work was the ability to provide more granular ordering of the way that we deliver fixes to Windows users. So if you're in fact going to get 30 megabytes worth of patches, how do we make sure that you get the most critical ones first? You know, because especially if you're a narrowband user, you know, you need those critical ones first. And XPSP2, which I'm sure you've heard plenty about before, but XPSP2 came directly out of Blaster. Okay, the impetus was really out of Blaster. Now, we took the opportunity to do a lot more, but the impetus came out of Blaster. And in fact, one of the pieces of data that we've learned in the last 2 weeks through some of the data collection mechanisms I'll describe in a moment is that if you're running XPSP2, you are 14.8% times less likely to have what we call prevalent malware, prevalent worms and viruses, than if you're running XP Gold. And I'll come back to that in a second. So let me rephrase that the other way. If you're running XP Gold instead of XPSP2, you're 1,480% more likely to have one of these prevalent forms of malware and viruses. And to us, that's actually a fairly good statement about parts of the efficacy of XPSP2. What was it that did this? In huge number, it's the firewall active by default in XPSP2 that helps there. But there are a number of other things in XPSP2 that do help as well.
I think also in terms of it going away, I think whatever it's called, virus theory or plague theory or something like that, once you inoculate some fraction of the population, which isn't 100%, it's like 40%, by theory, this stuff disappears. So.
You're right. In fact, the theory, and people don't like when I say this, but the theory supports a conspiracy theory that says that it's not in the best interest of a financially motivated commercial vendor of antivirus software to ever solve the problem.
Right. Whatever to inoculate that, whatever that magic threshold, once you hit the threshold, it's supposed to virtually disappear.
In fact, that very comment is the premise of a lot of our work around what's called NAP, which is the network access protection, quarantining users before they get onto networks. You're not worried that users can fake their quarantine and get out of it, because the reality is most users won't, and you're trying to just get the largest percentage of white blood cell count, up to prevent widespread infection and so forth. And in fact, we haven't seen any pandemic viruses in the last, pretty much since Sasser, that had nearly the reach and scope of some of these others. And there's a bunch of theories that go as to why that is. But one of which is, when I look at the number of users that are now running Windows Update in auto update mode, as was shipped as the default in XPSP2, we're able to deliver within 2 to 3 days of shipping a security patch, that patch to 80 to 90 million users. And typically within 5 weeks, that number is up. It approaches the maximum portion of what we're going to get, which is 170 to 200 million users, which is a fairly powerful mechanism. And which is why, again, you hear us talking a lot about our desire to be able to fix vulnerabilities before people announce them.
Is your picture of the future such that if I'm running Windows or Longhorn, that I'm not going to have to run Norton antivirus and Spybot and so on? Or will it be okay if I also run those?
So my realistic vision of the future is that this type of technology will not go away. What I want to see in that future, though, is a situation where more users, a higher percentage of users are in fact using them. They are up to date.
I'm talking about the third-party antivirus.
Yes. In fact, I'm happy to have them run Norton.
Presumably, Longhorn and other future products of Microsoft will have all your antivirus,
will not.
anti-spyware built in.
It will not.
It will not.
Longhorn will not have.
Potentially not.
Longhorn will not have our antivirus technology.
Okay,
built
Longhorn
in.
plus, whatever it's after Longhorn. I mean, I'm
There-
trying to envision what Microsoft's strategy.
But is this antitrust? I mean, what?
There is
That's part of the
there is a tremendous implication there. There's a tremendous implication. So what we will do in Longhorn from an antivirus point of view is we will have what we call scan and remove on upgrade. So we will have technology I was about to segue into a moment ago called Titan, and I'll come back to that. But technology called Titan, which runs every time you do an install or an upgrade version of Longhorn, that will remove the most common, highly prevalent worms and viruses from your machine before upgrade. So that's not proactive protection. So it can't be, you know, I'd like to call it an immunization, but it doesn't have a lasting effect. It's, you know, kind of a one-off thing.
I was just wondering, I'm not quite I was thinking what antivirus does is remove the current disease, but it doesn't actually inoculate you from getting infected again, right?
It does, actually, antivirus.
Because
So-
it quarantines the stuff that shows up?
No, so the most powerful part of most antivirus products on Windows today is what's called the mini filter driver. So all file system I/O gets passed through their detection mechanism. And so if you, in 99.9% of the cases, the only way to get code running in memory is to load it off the file system. And so what they're doing is they're looking for known or even potentially heuristically known malware before permitting it to be loaded into a process or to be used to spawn a new process. So what's the requisite there for inoculation is the presence of a signature or a strong enough heuristic mechanism that prevents it from getting loaded.
But it struck me in your story that it was the repair of the flaws in Windows that's more like an inoculation than this kind of, you know, mask that you wear around when you walk through the Tokyo subways. It's supposed to prevent you from getting sick.
So the flaws in Windows are actually, if we look at the total quantity of viruses that spread last year, the flaws in Windows accounts for, we were trying to do some numbers there, but it's less than half of all of the major virus infections had to do with flaws in Windows. And so when my wife on Sunday called me, she's been having trouble with her MSN account. They've been wanting to cancel it because I've been floating for free for like 9 years, and they want to start charging me to use MSN now. And of course, she's the one that uses it. So she calls me and she's like, I got this notice from MSN. It says they're about to cancel my account if I don't go fill out this form, right, and run this program. So I go into her office and look, and there, sure enough, there's this thing from msn-live.com, you know, that they're trying to get her to run. She's not savvy, and she did what she could to figure out whether or not she should run that. And she knows she was having trouble with MSN lately, and she doesn't want to get canceled. And it says you're going to get canceled by the end of the day if you don't run this, and you'll lose all your email and everything else. It's very hard to completely make the system impervious to that, and there are techniques.
But isn't that phishing?
So phishing is specifically about the collection of data, and this was actually doing a dual thing. One is it was trying to collect data, so it was phishing, but they were also trying to get you to run an executable. And so that's why we do a lot of work with the anti-phishing guys, because they often kind of cross the line.
Okay.
And we can't make all of those go away. And so our ultimate goal is some amount of defense in depth, but we want to make sure to go back to, to the question from Jeanette over here, is we want to make sure that when you're running protective services on your system, you are in fact not having to pay such a heavy price and penalty in terms of application compatibility, user interface interruption, and performance. Again, user interface interruption from a lot of these products comes simply because you're trying to convey and convince you the ongoing value of their products, so that you can keep keep buying new copies of their software. So to go back to Titan, which will then get us back to Longhorn. So in January, we began shipping through Windows Update a new breed of these cleaner tools that we call Titan. The public name is the Malicious Software Removal Tool, or MRT. And it's actually based on our antivirus engine. It's about a 40% stripped down version of our antivirus engine. We took out things like DOS macro virus detection subroutines out of the engine. And we have a limited set of signatures we put in it too. The signatures are for what we call highly prevalent malware. And these are things that fit into the Blaster and Sasser and MyDoom case that have a very high level of occupation of the ecosystem. And we will now begin releasing those tools once a month. They'll ship through Windows Update. They'll ship to every user of the Windows Update ecosystem, all 200 million of them. And they will detect and remove silently for users any of these forms of prevalent malware that are installed on their machine.
Is that the same thing as Microsoft Anti-Spyware?
It is not.
Okay.
It is not. So Microsoft Anti-Spyware is the technology we acquired from Giant Company, and I'll put those back together in a moment. So we in the February release of Titan, we detect and remove about 9 virus families and about 300 total variants out of these 9 virus families, plus what are called bots. If anybody's familiar with bots or zombies, we detect and remove about 700 variants of Galbot, also known as Agobot, also known as Fatbot, from the ecosystem. And to the best of our discovery to date, no antivirus vendor has actually included significant coverage for any of the bot families. The most we found was 5 variants of Agobot from Trend.
Do you tell people, do you tell the user what's happened on their machine?
So how about I'll come back to that as I. So our goal here was really again about cleaning the ecosystem, focused on ecosystem. The individual user gets a benefit, but it's really about the ecosystem, and it's about making sure that every month we stay current with new versions of a family that come out, because my mom hears about MyDoom on the internet and she wants to come and get a cleaner for it. She doesn't want to have to worry about, well, I have MyDoom.q, but Microsoft's cleaner only does MyDoom all the way up through MyDoom.n. This is actually a common problem again in the antivirus industry. And so we ship this the second Tuesday of every month. We wanted to make sure that we execute fast so users are not disincented. We wanted to make sure we're small. We're about 290K, which makes us sadly one of the smallest updates on Windows Update. We wanted to make sure we were incredibly reliable, because the worst thing that you can have is if you're not reliable, that users begin to turn off the Windows Update ecosystem. And so just to give you a stat, the Titan executed on as of yesterday, 240 million machines between January and February, and we had just under 1,000 crash reports through our what's called Watson, the online crash detection stuff. And that's actually within the statistical noise level of random crashes that happen on machines, memory parity errors, and so forth. In fact, we have a project working on the effects of the solar flares on memory computations and failure and stuff through MSR. It's kind of interesting. So we wanted to make sure that was happening. Now, as for notification, we ship 3 versions of this actually. One through Windows Update. It's completely transparent to the user. The first time it runs, the first month, they get an additional EULA that pops up that says, "Hey, there's this malicious code tool. You want to accept the EULA and run it, or not accept the EULA and therefore not run it." And here's what it kind of simply what it does to your machine. But much like most other cleaning mechanisms we send down, patches we send down through users through automatic mechanisms, the goal is transparency to the user. Our other mechanisms is we have an ActiveX control. Any user can come visit as many times a day as they want to see if they're clean, and we tell them exactly the full list. Or we have an executable that IT organizations can ship through through their organization and get reports back, or a normal user can run. But our goal was not to interfere with users, but actually our goal ahead of that was smallest amount of code possible, get our stride, and then begin to add things. So the disadvantage of this mechanism is that we never get any credit for it. There's a couple of disadvantages, but from our point of view, we never get any credit for it. We cleaned last year 60 million users' machines, and we never got a thank you for it from them, right? They never saw that we did anything to actually help them. And yeah, that's fine. Unsung heroes are an okay thing. But more importantly, our statistics show that if they had one piece of malware on their machine, they're likely to have more pieces of malware on their machines. And so what our desire is to let them know, in fact, that, hey, we found something on your machine, we cleaned it, you should know that it was there, and you should go, in fact, run complete AV. In fact, if you run the executable version of Titan, that's exactly what the UI tells you. It says, hey, we found this, we recommend, this is not a replacement for antivirus, we recommend you go run full antivirus scan. We tell them that no matter what, but if we found and cleaned malware, we make that extra bold and red, big, and everything else. In about June, I think it is, we'll start to throw a balloon tip from the user's screen when we detect things and remove it. Again, trying to not get in their way too much, because the updates often run at 3 a.m. They run in the background, and if the user's not there to see what's going on, you don't really help them. So
on the balloon, is there any contact number if the user has a question that goes with that?
It's not listed. It's not listed on the balloon as a contact. There's web reference information, but we began staffing a number 1866 PC Safety, which you can find all over the place on Microsoft.com.
But it doesn't come up because I get a balloon and I don't know if it's real or if it's some new bad person.
Yep.
Or something. I want to see if my machine's safe. I think having some way to
well, there's a link, right? There's not a phone number.
Okay.
There's a link.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, we don't want to generate a $25 phone call for it.
Can believe that it was really Microsoft.
I think this is just part of Microsoft training their end users in that we didn't used to see those automatic update
Yep.
things, and all of a sudden we see those, and we're, oh, okay, we trust Microsoft. Well, the same thing's going to happen with your little anti.
Well, the biggest problem, so everything.
And it's going to be true
You're right.
in your Longhorn anti-phishing, i.e. anti-phishing. All of a sudden,
everything
Microsoft
actually
is doing all these good things for you, and we're making you aware of it.
Everything comes in context, though, which is one of the problems. Like, when my wife came to me about this phishing/malware thing that happened to her the other day, I said, well, what happens when you click on this link to go to a website? And she's like, well, it asks me for my credit card number. It's like, and when somebody calls you on the telephone, no matter what, you never give them your credit card, and you do the same for these kinds of situations. So when you get a balloon that simply says, we removed the software from your machine, there's a certain context to that, right? That doesn't say, hey, we found this stuff. You have to go and pay us $19.95 to go and do this and give us our credit card to do it. So, savvy users can still figure it out, but you're right. There is a training aspect that has to happen over time.
Customers just get comfortable with that happening, and that they trust you, and that you're not doing anything bad.
Yep. And so our goals, again with Titan, is about prevalent cleaning of the ecosystem. We will never get to the point where we detect and remove every version of every in-the-wild virus out there, because if for no other reason, that breaks one of our commitments to our users around Titan, which is keeping it small. In order to put our entire in-the-wild signature collection mechanism into Titan, it would be about 5 megabytes. And we're not going to ship that down to users all the time. So that comes back into Longhorn, in that we're trying to walk this kind of fine line about being sensitive to the existence of a very large marketplace for antivirus software out there today, but yet trying to do the best things we can for our users, the right things we can do for our users. And so what we have in Longhorn is we will begin to keep our engine, the Titan engine, resident on the machine. And what that doesn't mean is, oh gosh, a Longhorn comes with antivirus. What all that means is, that 290K package we deliver every month is 200 currently about 260K worth of engine and 30K worth of signatures. So if you leave the engine resident, then you're delivering a smaller amount to those users every month, which leaves you more opportunity to deliver signatures to them. And of course, as I said, we'll do the clean and upgrade in a number of other situations. We also have integration to features like the system restore rollback capabilities to make sure that you're not rolling back to a prevalent virus-infected machine and so forth. But we will not have complete, what's considered full antivirus. It hasn't, because it's not. The primary thing that creates negative interaction with antivirus software is two things. Between multiple third-party antivirus software is two things. One is the filter driver manager that intercepts a file system calls. And since we're not providing proactive protection, we don't deliver our mini filter driver as part of Titan. The second is the interaction of the user interfaces of these tools that effectively become combating. We detected them doing this, and then the other UI pops up, and they basically fight each other.
So I gather you're not going to do anything for behavior blocking on Longhorn. Are you planning to do something afterwards, or is that just technology you have in your pocket in case it becomes relevant? Or what's the future of that?
There are some things in Longhorn that could be considered, towards the behavioral blocking path. But again, we're trying to be, very careful about, shipping technology that is, fairly trivial to overcome in a lot of cases.
But you're working on fixing it, or?
We're working on figuring out what the maximal impact of application compatibility, user experience, and security, where they really end up intersecting. And that's ultimately going to decide what goes into Longhorn. But I think in the beta 1 builds of Longhorn, when they come out later this year, you really won't see very much there. You have a related question?
Kind of. It's kind of apparently I ask high-level questions. I just was struck by your comment of, we cleaned 60 million machines but didn't get any credit for it. And our earlier comment that you said it's not in the antivirus company's business to actually fix things. If there's no disease, there's no business. So I think it's kind of important to Microsoft for the future viability of the corporation for kind of this plague of criminal activity and annoying and expensive behavior to not get worse. And so even were you not to get any credit, and it just, by the way, you're going to get monthly software updates, and by the way, before we install software, we're going to clean things up. And, hundreds of millions of people's lives got better. I think that's great, and I think you should brag about it within the corporation, and if it's a problem to brag about it outside the corporation, that doesn't seem...
We totally did it because it was the right thing to do.
And I don't think it's not going to stop being the right thing to do for the next... It would be wonderful when we don't need to do that anymore, but I don't know when that's going to be.
Please don't take my comment about we didn't get any credit as anything other than, people from outside the company have often said to me, well, gosh, we didn't even know this. It would be really nice to know these kinds of things. So we're happy to do everything that we can to fix the problems, we don't get credit for it. If we don't get credit, it's fine.
I don't see why you can't say that is, by the way, when you upgrade your software, we're going to clean it up before we do that. That's what an easy way for us, when you're lost with what the hell's going on in your computer. If you go upgrade, things will be better. That's an improvement.
Jason, you said that the reason multiple different antivirus vendors' stuff can't run on your machine has to do with this filter driver thing. Is there any plans to, I presume that's because of the way the interface is in Windows that they're hooking on, or whatever the term is?
It's partially. They could have written it. It's my phone. Okay, sorry about that. It's my phone. Excuse me. If they had any incentive to make sure that they ran well together, they could today.
Could you?
We, in fact, to finish the answer to your question, we do, in fact, and did, in fact, make some dramatic improvements to the filter driver architecture, create this filter driver manager layer, which ships in XPSB2, it ships in Windows 2003 Server, that makes it effectively trivially easy for them. In fact, they have to go out of their way to make sure that they don't play well together, as opposed to the other way around. The big challenge there is it's one of our normal API chicken and the egg problems. They're not incented to even deal with, think about, or care about this new API because it exists on such a small percentage of Windows machines. They can happily continue to write things exactly the way they are today. They like having one code base that works across all of our versions of Windows. So again, it's not in their value statement personally within those companies to go ahead and adopt this new filter driver, care about it, test it. In fact, many of them will try to block it.
So is there a way for Longhorn to be deployed such that if they continue to use their old interface, in fact, they will be able to play with each other? I mean, the obvious thing is what you did, which is create a composable interface. If they're not prepared to move to it, and you get to rewrite the operating system.
It actually isn't. So we're not rewriting the operating system. I wish we got that luxury, but it is not technically feasible in a way that is remotely performant or anything else to make them exactly plug compatible for what they have today and make them actually continue to work. It is not a lot of work for them to change their stuff, but it is in fact a change that they have to make. So what happens a lot of times with these APIs is they don't really begin to become adopted until they're second generation. And it's not second generation nature, it's just the rest of the ecosystem has evolved sufficiently.
Well, you could break the old API in the next,
yeah,
and
we
that
couldn't.
has pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
That would force them to rewrite their stuff.
I remember a couple of interesting lawsuits there.
Hate mail.
All right, we're getting pretty close to the end here, so let's. Yeah.
Okay.
You can talk about spyware and malware, and you didn't say anything about intrusion detection. Are you doing that, or do you call your malware detection? Do you throw it all in one bunch?
Microsoft is doing intrusion prevention, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. The IPS at the network layer is a portion of technology we call Mako. It's not in my direct team. I work with them regularly, but it's not. It is one of those things like having a very simple stateful inspection firewall that makes things better and easier. I think one of the gentlemen here had a comment earlier about, isn't it really the Windows patch that is like the inoculation as opposed to specifically the AV signature. And IPS effectively kind of gives you a very similar thing. If you're able to filter at a layer 7 protocol and say, oh, well, if this field is larger than 255 string characters, then drop that packet or truncate the string or something else, which is an IPS style expression, then you can write these kinds of things. Was soft patching presented to you guys in the past, the technology? There's a technology we had been investing in called soft patching that helped with some of this as well, but that technology was kind of abandoned. And
what you're doing is all stateless, just single packets you're looking at?
So for some of the IPS, no, there is actually session reconstruction in certain portions of it. So being able to extract objects out of the data streams and investigate them as in effect objects.
So is it a fair summary to say that in the antivirus arena, you're using an update to clean up big messes, but you're depending on the industry to provide the ongoing antivirus protection?
We will provide this year competitive antivirus software for the enterprise.
But not for the home consumers?
We will. I'm working my butt off on it.
Okay.
Let's just say that. We will compete in the antivirus industry, period.
Okay, and you've already decided that the spyware malware guys are a bit flaky, and there's already a beta for the Microsoft and
So
Anti-Spyware.
we ship that. We will ship a couple of additional updates, what we'll call beta refresh updates for that this year, as we continue our integration strategy. So the nice thing about that tool, just to give you some quick stats, we had, and again, these are all confidential, but we had, as of yesterday, about 8.9 million downloads of the Anti-Spyware beta product. The best estimate that I could have by watching the number of users that download signatures on a daily basis is that we have at least 7.5 million of those as active users.
I have to tell you, it's the only one that got my homepage back of all the ones I tried.
Thank you. It makes all of my legal problems worth it to hear you say that. And we've cleaned about 40 million pieces of spyware, at least 40 million people that participate in the SpyNet reporting mechanisms. We've cleaned at least 40 million pieces of spyware off in about 2 months.
You spoke earlier about what I guess is a perennial problem with spyware, which is how do you tell with ambiguous situations? How do you present a clean, or let's say clean, a practically usable user interface for that, where somebody says, I don't know whether this is something I should remove or not.
So ultimately, I'm a big believer in community-based interaction. I believe that at the end of the day, we're only going to be able to make so many choices on behalf of the user, and that users are going to have to be able to subscribe to people that they, services or people or other entities that they trust to help them make decisions for themselves, to help them make decisions that they're not able to make for themselves. And so we have a number of models we've put together of, think of e-opinions or any other style voting, community-based voting application. The problem is every single one of the voting mechanisms that exist today is trivially easy to scam. And what you really don't want is the next level of games from the vendors, which is scamming the voting applications against their competitors or for themselves. And it's a particularly hard problem. That is something we're continuing to evaluate. What we do know from our anti-spyware beta is that despite the fact that we still believe it's the most usable, in fact, most of the critics believe it's the most usable of the anti-spyware products out there from a UI point of view, there is a tremendous amount of work left to do. I had 18 days to do what we did to it, which was a lot of cleaning up of stuff, and
18 days, that's awesome.
18 days from the completion of acquisition. We entered what's called escrow at 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and then shipped on the 6th of January. But again, our primary goals there were to do a security review of the backend infrastructure and the actual application that's commensurate with our commitments to SDL, the Security Development Lifecycle here at Microsoft, and to fix a bunch of bugs that we knew about. And we're going to continue to do these beta refreshes as opportunities to make sure that we maintain excellent detection rates and removal rates for our customers while we're kind of integrating this into the rest of our product line and product family. We will ship an enterprise product suite that includes integrated technology of antivirus, anti-spyware, stateful policy-controlled firewalls, and a number of other security technologies. I think Bill actually announced that at RSA the other week.
Okay, we got 2 questions left here. We got Dieter first, then Manny, Mo, and Jeff.
Thank you.
So.
Well, part of this follows up on Eugene's question, and part of it may be naive. Does this work? So I'm loading something onto my computer rather than it coming over the network. Does the program scan the disk as well? And if it does, how does that interact with auto-run? And how does that interact with, for example, the Suncom software that's getting loaded onto my computer in the background when what I think I'm doing is playing a CD?
So there are, unfortunately, I have to answer that in 3 parts. The first part being, how does that work with existing antivirus on the market today, standard desktop antivirus? And the answer is standard desktop antivirus gets to intercept all file system calls. So as the files are being read off the disk, each one is individually scanned. And if they're compressed files, most antivirus software is able to.
And they're scanned, I mean, how do they determine whether or not?
How do they determine
Like, do they alert me that there's 15 programs being loaded? I mean, like.
So standard antivirus doesn't alert you if it doesn't find anything that's problematic, right?
Yeah.
From their definition of
Right.
problematic.
Yep.
And their definition of problematic is 95% or 99% of the time about static signatures,
Yeah.
and 1% of the time about some heuristic detection that you trip. But that's the only type of notification you get. They won't tell you that, in fact, 5 things have been added to your auto start, auto run keys. The second answer to the question has to do with Titan, which it runs once a month. That's all it runs. If you had installed something from a disk that was actually one of these forms of prevalent malware, when we run that once a month, we'll detect it, we'll remove it, life goes on. And the third portion of the answer to that is around our Microsoft Anti-Spyware beta product or technology, which instead of taking a purely file system-centric approach to the world, we take an approach that in a product we call checkpoint monitoring, and we also have another term within Microsoft that we have been developing called ASEPs. They're the same concept, it's just different terminology because one came from the product we acquired and one came from the work we're doing. ASEP is Auto Start Extensibility Point. And so we have about 59 ASEPs that we currently monitor with the Anti-Spyware product. And these are things like adding to the run registry keys, adding to the startup folders for different users, browser helper objects, browser toolbars, blah, blah, blah. There are 59 of these places that malware likes to intercept in the system and do work on. And so when you're running the Microsoft Anti-Spyware beta product, we watch for changes to any of those ASEPs. And we notify you if there are, in fact, unknown changes to those ASEPs. So
After the fact or during the process?
So the current mechanism, this goes back to the trade-offs of doing something versus doing nothing. Most all of the stuff in the Anti-Spyware beta product is an asynchronous notification. So right now it says, in most cases, the dialog you get says allow or block. And reality, from a pure technical point of view, it's really allow or undo, right? Because what we're doing, they've already added themselves, and we're going to remove them from there. There's, I think, 5 or 6.
Undo for some of those things really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
One question, 17 such questions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, just one. We'll go to the last question. But one of the things I just wanted to say is my goal in coming and talking to you folks today was to kind of lay a landscape of some of the things that are going on, so we can begin. I know there's a lot of people. Here. Fred and I had met the other week, and I just want to make sure that we have some amount of common framework for future discussions that we'd certainly like to engage with this group on a more ongoing basis. Last question.
I think ours is a mundane question. We've been doing empirical research over here. We all 3 downloaded a beta version. The first thing you have to do is validate that you have a real Windows product. We had completely different experiences. Mine did it automatically. I didn't have to enter anything. My poor colleague here had to keep turning his over to get the number off the bag.
I have a video of me doing that, by the way.
Over here.
Yeah. Why
is it so different?
That actually has nothing to do with our product, sadly enough. There's a set of technology called WGA, Windows Genuine Advantage, which is a program at Microsoft.
Which of them had it?
So that's so unfortunate that I have to answer the question for something that I didn't even do. So WGA is the method in the future that will be delivering a lot of components, these value-add components, value proposition to owning Windows. The Windows Anti-Spyware technology we've already declared will be included in the Windows value proposition, which means if you're a licensed, legitimate user of Windows, you get to run it, no extra cost. And so you're going to have to go through WGA. WGA is in a very early beta at the moment. We were the first large we accounted for 99.8% of all WGA verifications in the last 2 months, which is 99.9% of all that have ever happened. And there's a problem in the current incarnation where we don't recognize OEM product keys, and there's some interesting reasons. So I can tell you for a fact that you have an OEM installation of Windows that came that way, and that you have installed yours from a CD, from a Windows retail CD. So, which is why you didn't get a verification. You got an interrogation, probably. Interrogations typically happen because your CD key has been re-registered multiple times in some cases. So, you know, or it's been stolen by somebody else and used for various purposes. And I think there's also, I think there's also a random sampling that happens right now in the beta program that puts people through the additional verification. Now, right now, you actually have the option to opt out of WGA verification. When, you know, there's this thing that says download. You just kind of, you know, off with you, go away. In the future, you won't have that, but since it's in beta right now, when I download it, I just say, no, I don't want to participate in this, go away.
What was the good, bad, ugly? I forgot.
Yes, it is mundane. It has nothing to do with my technology. But I appreciate hearing the feedback anyway, because it gives me
all right.
stuff.
Well, given that, we pretty much... We're going into closed session here. We've got a few things.